How's that again? Presents. The truth about alien gods. Zecharia Sitchin, born July 11, 1920, died October 9, 2010, was an author of a number of books proposing an explanation for human origins involving ancient astronauts. Sitchin attributed the creation of the ancient Sumerian culture to the Anunnaki, which he stated was a race of extraterrestrials from a planet beyond Neptune called Nibiru. He asserted that Sumerian mythology suggests that this hypothetical planet of Nibiru is in an elongated, 3,600-year-long elliptical orbit around the Sun. Sitchin's books have sold millions of copies worldwide and have been translated into more than 25 languages. Sitchin's ideas have been resoundingly rejected by scientists, academics, historians, including Sumerologists, Orientalists and Assyriologists, and anthropologists who dismiss his work as pseudoscience and pseudohistory. His work has been criticized for flawed methodology, ignoring archaeological and historical evidence, and mistranslations of ancient texts, as well as for incorrect astronomical and scientific claims. Similar to earlier authors such as Immanuel Velikovsky and Eric von Daniken, Sitchin advocated hypotheses in which extraterrestrial events supposedly played a significant role in ancient human history. According to Sitchin's interpretation of Mesopotamian iconography and symbolism, outlined in his 1976 book The 12th Planet and its Sequels, there is an undiscovered planet beyond Neptune that follows a long, elliptical orbit, reaching the solar system roughly every 3,600 years. This planet is called Nibiru, although Jupiter was the planet associated with the god Marduk in Babylonian cosmology. According to Sitchin, Nibiru, whose name was replaced with Marduk in original legends by the Babylonian ruler of the same name in an attempt to co-opt the creation for himself, collided catastrophically with Tiamat, a goddess in the Babylonian creation myth the Anu Elis, which he considers to be another planet once located between Mars and Jupiter. This collision supposedly formed the planet Earth, the asteroid belt, and the comets. Sitchin states that when struck by one of planet Nibiru's moons, Tiamat split in two, and then on a second pass Nibiru itself struck the broken fragments and one half of Tiamat became the asteroid belt. The second half, struck again by one of Nibiru's moons, was pushed into a new orbit and became today's planet Earth. Sitchin also speculated that Pluto, which he identifies as both Gobi and Isimut, was originally a satellite of Saturn, but Nibiru's gravity perturbed it, sending it to the outer solar system and giving the body its peculiar orbital path, intersecting the orbit of Neptune. According to Sitchin, Nibiru, called the 12th planet, because, Sitchin claimed, the Sumerians, God's given conception of the solar system, counted all 8 planets, plus Pluto, the Sun and the Moon, was the home of a technologically advanced human-like extraterrestrial race called the Anunnaki in Sumerian myth, who Sitchin states are called the Nephilim in Genesis. He wrote that they evolved after Nibiru entered the inner solar system, and they first arrived on Earth probably 450,000 years ago, looking for minerals, especially gold, which they found and mined in Africa. Sitchin states that these gods were the rank-and-file workers of the colonial expedition to Earth from planet Nibiru. According to Sitchin, Enki, the Sumerian god of water and human culture, suggested that to relieve the Anunnaki, who had mutinied over their dissatisfaction with their working conditions, that primitive workers, Homo sapiens, be created by genetic engineering as slaves to replace them in the gold mines by crossing extraterrestrial genes with those of Homo erectus. According to Sitchin, ancient inscriptions report that the human civilization in Sumer, Mesopotamia, was set up under the guidance of these gods, and human kingship was inaugurated to provide intermediaries between mankind and the Anunnaki, creating the divine right of kings doctrine. Sitchin believes that fallout from nuclear weapons, used during a war between factions of the extraterrestrials, is the evil wind, described in the Lament for Ur that destroyed Ur around 2000 BC. Sitchin states the exact year is 2024 BC. Sitchin says that his research coincides with many biblical texts, and that biblical texts come originally from Sumerian writings. Criticism of Sitchin's work falls primarily into 3 categories: translations and interpretations of ancient texts, astronomical and scientific observations, and literalism of myth. When Sitchin wrote his books, only specialists could read the Sumerian language. However, sources such as the 2006 book Sumerian Lexicon have made the language more accessible to non-experts. American biblical scholar Michael S. Heiser states he has found many inaccuracies in Sitchin's translations and challenges interested parties to use this book to check their validity. Professor Ronald H. Fritz, author of the book Invented Knowledge, False History, Fake Science and Pseudo-Religions, mentions the example of Sitchin's claim that the Sumerian sign Djur means pure ones of the blazing rockets, adding that Sitchin's assignment of meanings to ancient words is tendentious and frequently strained. Fritz also commented on Sitchin's methodology, writing that when critics have checked Sitchin's references, they have found that he frequently quotes out of context or truncates his quotes in a way that distorts evidence in order to prove his contentions. Evidence is presented selectively and contradictory evidence is ignored. Sitchin bases his arguments on his personal interpretations of Egyptian and Sumerian texts, and the CLVA 243. Sitchin wrote that these ancient civilizations knew of a 12th planet, when in fact they only knew 5. Hundreds of Sumerian astronomical seals and calendars have been decoded and recorded, and the total count of planets on each seal has been 5. Seal VA 243 has 12 dots that Sitchin identifies as planets. When translated, Seal VA 243 reads "You're his servant," which is now thought to be a message from a nobleman to a servant. According to Heiser, the so-called sun on Seal VA 243 is not the Sumerian symbol for the sun but is a star, and the dots are also stars. The symbol on Seal VA 243 has no resemblance to the hundreds of documented Sumerian sun symbols. In a 1979 review of the 12th planet, Roger W. Westcott, professor of anthropology and linguistics at Drew University, Madison, New Jersey, noted Sitchin's amateurishness with respect to the primacy of the Sumerian language. Sitchin's linguistics seems at least as amateurish as his anthropology, biology, and astronomy. On page 370, for example, he maintains that all the ancient languages, including early Chinese, stemmed from one primeval source, Sumerian. Sumerian, of course, is the virtual archetype of what linguistic taxonomists call a language isolate, meaning a language that does not fall into any of the well-known language families or exhibit clear cognation with any known language. Even if Sitchin is referring to written rather than to spoken language, it is unlikely that his contention can be persuasively defended, since Sumerian ideograms were preceded by the Azilian and Tartarian signaries of Europe as well as by a variety of script-like notational systems between the Nile and Indus rivers. Sitchin's planetary collision hypothesis does superficially resemble one suggested by modern astronomers, the giant impact hypothesis of the Moon's formation about 4.5 billion years ago by a body impacting with the newly formed Earth. However, Sitchin's proposed series of rogue planetary collisions differ in both details and timing. As with Immanuel Velikovsky's earlier worlds in collision thesis, Sitchin states that he has found evidence of ancient human knowledge of rogue celestial motions in a variety of mythological accounts. In Velikovsky's case, these interplanetary collisions were supposed to have taken place within the span of human existence, whereas for Sitchin these occurred during the early stages of planetary formation, but entered the mythological account passed down by the alien race which purportedly evolved on Nibiru after these encounters. According to former Immanuel Velikovsky assistant-turned-prolific critic, C. Leroy Ellenberger, Sitchin states that, from an equal start, the Nephilim evolved on Nibiru 45 million years ahead of comparable development on Earth with its decidedly more favorable environment. Such an outcome is unlikely, to say the least, since Nibiru would spend over 99% of its time beyond Pluto. Sitchin's explanation that heat from radioactive decay and a thick atmosphere keep Nibiru warm is absurd and does not address the problem of darkness in deep space. Also unexplained is how the Nephilim, who evolved long after Nibiru arrived, knew what happened when Nibiru first entered the solar system. The scenario outlined by Sitchin, with Nibiru returning to the inner solar system regularly every 3,600 years, implies an orbit with a semi-major axis of 235 astronomical units, extending from the asteroid belt to 12 times farther beyond the Sun than Pluto. Elementary perturbation theory indicates that, under the most favorable circumstances of avoiding close encounters with other planets, no body with such an eccentric orbit would keep the same period for 2 consecutive passages. Within 12 orbits the object would be either ejected or converted to a short period object. Thus, the failed search for a trans-Plutonian planet by T.C. Van Flandern of the U.S. Naval Observatory, which Sitchin uses to bolster his thesis, is no support at all. Sitchin, in the case of Adam's alien genes, states that 223 genes found by the Human Genome Sequencing Consortium are without the required predecessors on the genomic evolutionary tree. Later researchers have argued that the conclusion from the Human Genome Sequencing Consortium cannot be drawn due to a lack of a comprehensive gene database for comparison. An analysis by Salzburg identified 40 potential genes laterally transferred into the genome from prokaryotic organisms. Salzburg also argues that gene loss combined with sample size effects and evolutionary rate variation provide an alternative, more biologically plausible explanation. Peter James, co-author of the controversial book Centuries of Darkness, has criticized Sitchin both for ignoring the world outside Mesopotamia and more specifically for wholly misunderstanding Sumerian, Assyrian and Babylonian literature. He uses the epic of creation Enuma Elish as the foundation for his cosmogony, identifying the young god Marduk, who overthrows the older regime of gods and creates the Earth as the unknown 12th planet. In order to do this, he interprets the Assyro-Babylonian theogony as a factual account of the birth of the other 11 planets. The Babylonian names for the planets are established beyond a shadow of a doubt. Ishtar was the deity of Venus, Nergal of Mars, and Marduk of Jupiter, and confirmed by hundreds of astronomical/astrological tables and treatises on clay tablets and papyri from the Hellenistic period. Sitchin merely ignores all this and assigns unwarranted planetary identities to the gods mentioned in the theogony. For example, Otsu, attested as god of the primeval waters, becomes, of all things, the Sunya, as it suits Sitchin, is sometimes planet Neptune and sometimes a spaceman. And the identity of Ishtar as the planet Venus, a central feature of Mesopotamian religion, is nowhere mentioned in the book. Instead, Sitchin arbitrarily assigns to Venus another deity from Enuma Elish, and reserves Ishtar for a role as a female astronaut. William Irwin Thompson comments on what he calls Sitchin's literalism. What Sitchin sees is what he needs for his hypothesis. So figure 15 on page 40 is radiation therapy, and figure 71 on page 136 is a god inside a rocket-shaped chamber. If these are gods, why are they stuck with our cheap B-movie technology of rockets, microphones, spacesuits, and radiation therapy? If they are gods, then why can't they have some really divine technology such as intradimensional wormhole travel, anti-gravity, starlight propulsion, or black hole bounce rematerializations? Sitchin has constructed what appears to be a convincing argument, but when he gets close to single images on ancient tablets, he falls back into the literalism of here is an image of the gods in rockets. Suddenly, ancient Sumer is made to look like the movie set for Destination Moon. Eric von Daniken's potboiler Chariots of the Gods has the same problem. Nazca Plains in Peru is turned into a World War II landing strip. The gods can cross galactic distances, but by the time they get to Peru, their spaceships are imagined as World War II prop jobs that need an enormous landing strip. This literalization of the imagination doesn't make any sense, but every time it doesn't, you hear Sitchin say there can be no doubt, but